Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to another undergraduate physics colloquium. Today we have a wonderful talk by Tom Kai, and it's going to be on the economics of nuclear power. So I hope you enjoy this insight into the economics of the physical field.
Hi guys. For all those who have gone to Arian's colloquium in the last 2 weeks and expect anything equal of quality to this presentation, it is not the case. This is less of an objective analysis of the physics and more of a general complaint about environmentalism in the modern. But anyways, this is a presentation about nuclear energy and the economics associated with it and why humanity can't have good things. So number one, we begin with table of contents, overview of topics. There's some sources of electricity in the 21st century. Generally, we'll cover the cost of resource extraction, fossil fuels versus nuclear. I'm gonna have my phone up because I have some notes on my phone. Right, so I have presenter comments. Right, so we're going to cover some source of electricity in the 21st century, the cost of resource extraction, such as coal, natural gas, oil, and obviously uranium. And obviously, we're also going to talk about the costs of solar and wind that we usually don't talk about when we're discussing. We'll also discuss the benefits and consequences of like the trade-off between fossil fuels and nuclear energy. Fun fact, there's minimal. Nuclear is just objectively better. Um, and then obviously the main point of this conversation is the levelized full system cost of electricity, which is it is the cost per megawatt hour of a system of a full electrical grid, hence the full system, at a level amount, which means at an average like efficiency rate of like around 90 something percent, so they can like outside of impurities, freak accidents, and that kind of stuff. That is the levelized full system cost of electricity. There's something else called the levelized cost of electricity, which I will cover later. Also, we'll talk about additional cost factors, like when you're discussing renewable energy, like BATs, and cost comparisons between all of the other resource energy systems that we really do have. And obviously, the main title that they didn't let me put onto the post was "Why I Hate the German Government." They are incredibly incompetent, and they are generally the reason why humanity can't have good things. Fukushima's consequences, the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster that actually killed no one, but obviously that caused the German government to go into some kind of emotional free fall about nuclear energy, and they decided to go on a full wind power thing that obviously kind of conflicts with the previous concept of the LFSCOE that I'll discuss. And this leads to something that is kind of prevalent in most modern environmentalist movements, known as the greenwashing of fossil fuels. People who say this is clean fossil fuels, that's not a thing. I don't really think that's a thing. I'll quickly show you why. And concluding statements. Obviously, everyone here is sound of mind. Everyone knows that the glowing green thing is good. Some remaining concerns about nuclear energy, especially uranium, a reflection on environmentalism and why it sucks, and some concluding remarks and a conclusion. So that is generally the overview of topics. You can see that there is a red circle around Germany. Germany has 3 reactors. This is a map from March of 2021. This map is no longer accurate for Germany. So here's the source of energy for the last century. You can see that coal mainly has dominated in the energy production since the Industrial Revolution by Great Britannia. They brought in coal as a main system. It was very cheap. Coal is very simple. You get it out of the ground, you put it in a stove, you boil some water. That's about it. You will quickly notice that boiling water seems to be a trend in human electricity, in human electrical production. Even from Stone Age up to now, we're still boiling water at higher and higher efficiency. Obviously, in the 1940s, when obviously World War II happens, the military-industrial complex, we all love Lockheed Martin and Boeing. They bring us a lot of oil and mainly diesel and petrol to use in commercial vehicles, military vehicles, a lot of other motor-related stuff that kind of gives us the duopoly on energy between oil and coal up until 1965, which was the first commercialization of liquefied natural gas in the United States. That is when they finally figured out how to not make it blow up in people's faces, and that was when they also realized, oh, we can put this on boats, we can transport it easier, And obviously, natural gas, I'll explain later why people preferred it to coal and oil, mainly because it was easier to get, but also because it was a bit less dangerous. It was less prone to blow up in your face, unless you left the stove on. And by 1980s, environmental concerns such as uh, collapsing icebergs, rising sea levels, has led to the rise of hydropower in many nations. Hydropower, unlike wind and solar, is an incredibly great resource. But if you live in Mongolia, it is a bit hard to get hydropower considering Mongolia has 0 large rivers. Anyways, France and Japan in 1973, as you can tell, were the first to invest in nuclear energy after they realized their very much oil-based economies collapsed after the Saudis and the Iraqis and the rest of the Gulf decided, you know what, maybe Zionism isn't a good thing. Let's embargo your oil. So they decided to embargo the Western world's oil, and that caused France and Japan to realize, okay, let's try this nuclear thing. And that was the beginning of the nuclear project, which I will talk soon enough. In the 21st century, despite advancements in technology, coal, LNG, and also other fossil fuels remain the dominant energy source in the 21st century, mainly because of how available it is and how easy it is to acquire. Um, if you go to some parts of Australia, you can literally find coal just lying on the ground because of erosion, because of kangaroos. You will it is a lot easier to harvest coal and natural gas and oil than renewables, which cost a lot of money. Numbers will be added later, but coal and natural gas and fossil fuels and all that kind of other stuff is still dominant to this day, mainly because it is how cheap it is. Solar and wind really has only made its significant entries in the late 2000s. Thank you, Al Gore. He was a pioneer of solar and wind. Also, he claims he invented the internet. Not sure about that. And nuclear has remained constant in energy consumption despite rapid developments in the technology in the last 20 years, thanks to him specifically. He actually invented nuclear reactors, Justin. Anyways, this is about the current situation that we have reached in the 21st century by 2024. So here's some like significant sources of energy, right? Like this is what energy production, well, energy consumption actually in the world looks like right now. You can tell traditional biomass, which is burning your exam sheets after your exam, is considered traditional biomass. If you use that to heat up your kettle, that is suggested, especially if you take first year mathematics. Solar and wind take up a very minute part of electricity, but if you do look at a lot of Western countries, wind and solar, this does not adequately represent the large strides that many Western nations has taken towards wind and solar in the 21st century. You will quickly realize why it doesn't work. Hydropower, my favorite, because as I am a resident of Quebec, that is the only thing we are powered on. Nuclear at 3.69 because Germany and Greta Thunberg has not risen past that number since the 1990s, which is really concerning considering that with all the nuclear advancement that we've made in CANDU reactors, that kind of stuff, we really should have expected we would have made more nuclear reactors, but no. Oil, natural gas, and coal make up most of the proportions because humanity can't have nice things and we still go for cheap options. Out of these, we really care about like 5. These. Yes, yes, hydropower is important, especially Montreal, Austria, a lot of the European countries with large rivers, such as Romania. They have a lot of hydropower, but since I am considering this in a general case of what source of electricity is good on a general case, hydropower is very specific to specific regions, specific climates, specific situations, and usually they're not very viable for a lot of countries, especially those countries without major waterways, or waterways just not large enough to sustain, or maybe waterways that are too volatile to dam up. For now, we'll just consider these. You may consider that oil has disappeared. Oil, for now, we'll just put it with natural gas. Not too important right now. It is mainly about natural gas and coal. Oil is also a source of energy, but when you're considering like heat, the AC and the projector and all your laptops, it's mainly powered not by oil generators, but by natural gas generators and coal generators, which I'll cover soon enough. So this is how coal resource extraction works. If any of you guys have played Minecraft, it's very easy. You grab a pickaxe, you go to the mine, you grab some coal. Obviously, there are different ways of procuring coal. We have kind of made it more efficient these days with 100-meter tall machines that they found in Germany. The reason why coal's dominance of the energy market, even right now, even after 100 years of the Industrial Revolution and its consequences, we still use coal because it's really easy to use. You take coal, no refining necessary. Just grab the thing, put it in a boiler, boil water. As always, we boil water. Use the spin a turbine and using the generator for. I'm not going to cover the magnetism, the electromagnetism of the generator, but generally that's how it works. And then obviously we create electricity. Fun fact: people usually like to associate these cooling towers with nuclear energy. Basically, all power stations have these massive cooling towers. If you guys like play Civ 5, you'll know that this usually represents nuclear energy. It does not. Coal is obviously the first step for steam engines. Before that, there was this guy in Turkey in the 1500s that did make a steam engine using traditional biomass, wood, but he only used it to spin donor. So the Industrial Revolution was delayed by 300 years. Anyways, despite all of this, despite all of the simplicity, why we're trying to phase it out is because ash disposal and river pollution, like here and here, are present in the generating process, and it causes massive damage to the environmental system. So this is how coal extraction kind of looks. The process you have between uh, hand mined coal, obviously. Lung cancer is really popular when you're doing hand mined coal. And when you're doing large pit mine coal, it is very fun to destroy large swaths of habitable land for animals and fauna and forests because greed. This is the costs of coal extraction. This is when I described the ash river, the ash puddles, where they put all the ash into this pile and just call it a day, ignoring that thousands of animals die to these things on a basically daily basis. This is the consequence of the polluting river runoff. Uh, yep. This is actually bottom right is actually in Canada, which is why we have indigenous protections that Doug Ford is trying to erase, because this is happening on treaty land in Alberta. Wonderful country we have. We have natural gas, which is the sort of better form of coal, not by much. Be it in this is shale form. Shale gas is generally what Alberta has. It is more. It exists. It is not a byproduct of oil. It is not a byproduct of anything else. It just happens to exist within small pockets in very porous sedimentary rock, known as shale, hence the term. We have also conventional natural gas, which is the gas that comes out from oil deposits, which obviously Alberta has a lot of. And generally, these are the two main kinds of natural gas. Alberta has a lot of both. We also have coal bed methane, but usually we don't use methane because methane is really polluting and it's kind of inefficient, so no one uses that. We're going to ignore sour and tight gas for now. So how this is usually done is fracking, which is also what they use to extract oil. They pump fresh water along with 3,000 different types of corroding sulfides that destroy local environments into the wellbore, and then it comes down. Using the high pressure, it breaks the rock into like small fissures into the sedimentary rock. Sand and the particles are added to the water to keep the gaps open. This sand and particles usually degrade the structural integrity of of the general region, which is why obviously there are instances where very shallow fracking operations has caused sinkholes to open up in a lot of its regions. You can search it up; it's kind of terrifying. Obviously, the frack water, along with the sand and other stuff, is collected back up along with the oil and natural gas that comes with it. This is very much as dangerous as uranium leaching, which I will explain later, as the possibility of freshwater contamination, like here, is incredibly high. However, natural gas is in lower emissions than oil and is kind of also easier to transport in liquid form, making it very consistent options for countries needing very quick energy very fast. E.g., say, for example, you're Germany and you decide to close all your nuclear plants for some reason. Here's a picture of all the natural gas extraction. We have fracking operations in Cebu, Morocco. That's the wastewater pond with all the dangerous chemicals in Louisiana. This is the methane. This is from the sand tar that causes massive amounts of greenhouse gases. And this is the artist's impression of what happens when you kill off all the trees because you poison all the groundwater with selenium. Anyways, resource extraction for uranium. It's not much better, but it's a bit better because we need less of it. Uranium mining is a lot more difficult than coal mining, requiring like leaching in most cases, because open pit mining for uranium usually leads to cancer for everyone in a 50-kilometer radius. So we usually don't do that unless you do live in Russia. Leaching is when you add hydrogen peroxide, sulfuric acid, and a bunch of other nasty stuff into uranium deposits to dissolve the surrounding rock until only the ore yellow cake remains. It's very dangerous to groundwater reserves because obviously you generally do not want sulfuric acid in your drinking water. and obviously that is really bad. Uranium that is mined through either leaching or mining comes up as U308, sorry, U308, also known as yellow cake uranium. I generally do not, despite it being called cake, I would not generally suggest you eat it. Generally, this is what it kind of looks like. This is radioactive dust from an open pit mine in Kazakhstan. Try not to do that. This, obviously, you can't tell, but the water here is highly radioactive. This is in New Mexico. Most likely why Walter White has lung cancer. So how does a nuclear reactor work? Part 0, fission, right? Most of you guys have taken physics. I haven't taken physics, but most of you guys have taken physics. Nuclear reactors mainly work off of uranium-235. You hit a neutron hits uranium-235, and when uranium-235 is hit by a neutron, it has a really high chance, 85%, to fission into lighter elements, usually barium and krypton. The probability of that is covered in physics 357. I generally have not taken that course. I dropped out of physics way too early for that. But if anyone here has taken 357, you can ask them about that. I have no idea how that works. These neutrons continue the chain reaction by hitting other 235 atoms, or the currently excited barium and krypton atoms, and they expel gamma rays and energy. Pretty good stuff. And as such, a neutron is capable of starting a chain reaction of energy released throughout the material in the reaction chamber. Usually, obviously, we send a bit more neutrons because sending one neutron at 85% is a bit too low of a gamble, so we send quite a bit at a time. How does the nuclear reactor work? The basics. After uranium cake is mined, look at this beautiful mousse of a cake we have here. They use centrifuges to separate the 235 that we do want from the 238 that isn't really wanted. And the yellow cake is usually considered good for nuclear reactor use if it's around 5%. 235 separation takes advantage of basically the mass difference in the 3 neutrons between those 3. And this takes place in a gas centrifuge because trying to separate things in a very solid thing is generally not advised. Yeah. Part 1b, gas basics. Uranium oxide, after being processing, is converted to uranium hexafluoride gas, which spins around at 50,000 RPM to relocate the heavier 238 to the center of the chamber, while the lighter 235 congregate the center. This isn't a one-cylinder process because separating gases is pretty difficult. So purer and purer UF6 gas is fed down the rows of centrifuges until the desired 5% is achieved, or higher for nuclear weapons, though that is usually banned by the UN. I would not suggest you make your own nuclear weapons. Fluoride is extracted from the gas to make UO2 in a high temperature kiln, powdered and compressed into a ceramic fuel pellet. It's a bit like making pottery, but the pot kills you. These pellets are encased in metal, usually zirconium fuel rods, and that kind of waste. The UF6 waste product is called depleted uranium, and we put them in like tank armor and Nokia phone cases to make them really resilient. 2, reactor. Yes, we are boiling water. That chain reaction releases energy. It boils water. Water turns turbine. Good stuff. We have not moved on from boiling water yet. Maybe he can do some research and work on that. Why RMBK reactors? So these control rods temper the chain reaction, because if the chain reaction goes on for too long, you have an explosion, which is exactly what happened at the Chernobyl plant, because the RBMK reactors use graphite control rods that actually increase the reactivity before shutting it down. And if you do it in just the wrong way possible, it will actually cause the atoms to go supercritical, and it'll just immediately explode, which is exactly what happened. Candu found a way to use heavy water, using heavy water to not need 5% enriched uranium. Instead of taking uranium fuel enrichment, taking at around 0.7% U235, which is a lot of just regular yellow cake, so that's quite nice. Anyways, nuclear energy versus fossil fuels. What's the difference? Like, why do we want this? Nuclear is not a renewable. That is, by definition, nuclear energy is not a renewable energy. Renewables generally do not need consistent addition of raw materials. Reactors usually need more uranium to operate. A gigawatt reactor needs around 27 tons of low-enriched uranium, of low-enriched 235 a year. This equates to around 250 tons of natural uranium, as in just the messy stuff, per year to be mined to sustain that 1 gigawatt reactor's operation. Around 60 kilotons of uranium are mined every year, with 71 kilotons mined in 2024. Each kilogram of uranium costs around 130 USD to mine, personnel costs, truck costs, all that kind of stuff. There are around 440 nuclear reactors in the world as of 2021. I don't really have updated statistics on that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Nuclear reactors produce around 12 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is quite nice compared to coal and natural gas. And from the entire process, we're mining and generating, so that's quite nice. There's been 4 deadly uranium-linked disasters in the last century. Chernobyl is one of them. The rest of them have like casualties in the single or double digits. Global coal production is around 8 million kilotons. Global natural gas production is around 4.12 trillion cubic meters. Each kilogram of coal costs around 0.2 cents. Around 2 cents. Each cubic meter of natural gas costs around 6 cents. Naturally, fossil fuels, this is exactly why people generally use fossil fuels instead of nuclear, because it's really expensive and you can just find it in the ground, especially if you live in Australia. But obviously, there's an issue, as in coal produces around 820 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour in the entire process of mining and generating. Most of this is during the generating phase because they burn massive amounts of coal, which releases CO2 into the air. Deadly coal-linked disasters in the last century, more than 600. So reasonable trade-off. So what is levelized full system cost of energy? As I've described, it is the cost per megawatt hour of an entire system if we were just to use that one energy source, or one plus a bit. There's a difference of 95 and 100, but I'll explain that later. Levelized cost of energy is basically per thing. It's the per megawatt hour for a singular generator with consideration to generator lifetime and other things. So levelized cost of energy per thing is for coal, every megawatt hour is around 76 USD. Natural gas, obviously, combined cycle means that they're combining both the heat naturally produced the combustion chamber where they spin the turbine, plus the heat from the combustion chamber to heat water, and that is a combined cycle of both heating water, bingo, and natural gas turbines. If we do the motor only, it's around 67 USD. Nuclear is very expensive if you're doing just one generator for 1 megawatt. So solar and wind are very cheap because in this case, imagine this as you're trying to power a fridge for a year. About, I don't know if fridges that use megawatt hours, but if you find a big enough fridge, that's probably the case. So levelized full system cost of energy, we're going to use Germany as an example because they're really bad at this. How much it costs per system. So LFCO 95 means if 95% of that energy source, if that energy source was expanded to power 95% of the national grid, this is how much it would cost per megawatt hour. As you can tell, and obviously for this, it's 100%, which kind of collapses national economies. But these values are kind of wrong. They'll correct it in a later table. This is a better representation of what is feasible on a national level and what is good for like energy policy. As noted, wind and solar become flagrantly unaffordable after on a national level, especially when trying to convert a full national grid to it. This number is actually corrected to around 1.5K USD per megawatt hour, which is kind of insane. Additional costs of wind and solar, you have energy upscaling costs. How do we describe it? Like nuclear has a very expensive setup cost because it's a lot of concrete. But to use y equals mx plus b, it has a very nuclear reactors have a very high y-intercept, but a very minimal upscaling slope because you just add more uranium. That's usually how it works. Obviously, if you need more power, you build more reactors. But on a case-by-case basis, if you look at Darlington, they're usually gigawatt reactors and not megawatt. Most solar panels are kilowatt solar panels. So it's going to take, so for solar panels, obviously, the issue is that it has a very low setup cost, but upscaling basically means you have to make a new solar panel every time you want to increase your wattage, which is very expensive. Environmental costs, 800,000 bats are killed by wind turbines every year in the US. I don't know why I put that in there, but that is quite an interesting fact. Solar panels and wind farms require massive tracts that unobstructed land. Hope you like destroying forests. And solar panels are made with lead and cadmium, which are generally not very good things to have in your body or in animals' bodies. Solar panels and turbine blades are also made of unrecyclable materials like fiberglass and composite materials, or they're so incredibly tedious to recycle, they might as well just get new materials. So that is why wind and solar, there's some issues. Yes. There's some cost comparisons. As you can tell, this is the updated graph. Obviously, it is a comically expensive 1.5K for a full solar system in Germany, around 800 USD for a full solar system, or 95% solar system. This is, at the bottom, we have added a new wind and solar table, which is if we just combine wind and solar, it would still cost a whopping 454 USD per megawatt hour. Obviously, natural gas is a direct burnable fuel with a lot of deposits and really easy and high and high ease of access and really easy generating mechanisms, it gets actually cheaper because of economies of scale. I'm not going to explain economies of scale to you. That's equal 102. Anyways, each plant rated from around 300 megawatt per for like SMRs up to like around 3 to 4 gigawatts for CANDU and other reactors has a really high base cost, but has a really small scaling cost from probably 1 megawatt hour to theoretical base to the German 494 terawatt hour electrical grid. Cost remains similar. It's why I hate the German government, the economics of nuclear energy. I genuinely hate the German government because they remove all things that is fun. The energy transition was a plan set up by the German government in 2010 uh, with a greenhouse gas reduction of 95% and by 2050, relative to 1990, and renewable target of 60% by 2050. Obviously, that has not been going so well. Unlike other countries, Germany had included nuclear in its conventional fuels, as in fossil fuels, to be phased out with a plan to entirely leave nuclear by 2050. Some foreshadowing given by the previous slides of around how much wind power, which is what they plan to be their main source of energy. Most people, you guys should have noticed that the massive commitment for wind power is going to get quite concerning once you consider that the full system cost is around 454 USD per megawatt. Fukushima and the nuclear U-turn. So in 2011, Germany had 17 nuclear reactors. They all planned to phase them out by 2050. But after the Fukushima disaster of later that year, the German government just fully dismantled 8 of them because they were scared of it. Hold on. What? No, Germany dismantled 8 nuclear reactors after Japan had a meltdown. Good, good stuff, dude. By the end of 2011, it had 9 nuclear reactors. That went further down to 3 by 2021, and the kind of incorrect map at the start. And as of April 2023, Germany no longer has any active nuclear reactors. Everyone's very sad. Now, this graph, as you can tell, in 2025, nuclear has just all but disappeared off the map. The pink is nuclear energy. You can see it just disappeared off the map because they have shut down all their nuclear reactors. Not a good idea. Energy backsliding, obviously, in 2014, Germany opens an agreement with a Swedish company to invest in brown coal. What's brown coal? Brown coal is even worse coal. It's coal that is less efficient, more polluting, but it is cheaper. So Germany invests a lot in that, so much for reduction in greenhouse gases. And in the words of the energy minister, Sigmar Gabriel, coal use was essential because Germany was going to phase out nuclear power, period. It was a political decision and it was non-negotiable. So coal and natural gas plants had reopened in Germany as fast as the nuclear plants were shutting down. That is not a good direction to go if you're trying to go green. Obviously, because the German government has no responsibility to its voters whatsoever, the endpoint of Germany's energy transition was supposed to be a return to wind and solar under a full LFS 95 system, as a 95% of its energy bill would be supplied by wind and solar. Obviously, that's not happening. It costs like $800 per megawatt hour under an LFS 95 system. And the difficulty is that because of how linearly it scales, better technology will not bring cheaper costs. So it is literally impossible that Germany would want to it'd be literally impossible for Germany to have an LFS 95 system. Not possible. This thus leads to the temporary bridge of coal and natural gas being permanent because obviously they can't recoup the costs. They can't afford the costs of having an LFS 95 system of wind and solar. So the temporary bridge of natural gas that they used to get to wind and solar has now become permanent. As without nuclear, an LFS 100 solar wind system could never exist without support from fossil fuels. Not wanting to look bad because they have no responsibility to the citizens whatsoever. The Germans declare natural gas as a green energy to cover up their energy failures. What percentage of natural gas and fossil fuels do you think is green? 0%. There is no such thing as clean fossil fuels. It is a lie. Politicians who say green oil or green natural gas, punch them. So about German energy production, this is about how much it costs in Germany for electricity. For reference, the previous graphs has definitely shown what is wrong with German energy production. Germany has attempted to enforce this LFS 95 of wind and solar on its energy grid. Obviously, a 3-digit USD cost per megawatt hour makes it basically impossible to achieve. The German government is not boundless of money. And thus Germany has to resort to cheaper Russian natural gas and domestic brown coal for make up to energy shortfall, completely destroying its goals for carbon neutral by 2050. Not happening. As a result, well, actually, not only is this happening, but because they want to achieve carbon neutrality, they've imposed a carbon tax, like we have in Canada, on their citizens for using natural gas and coal. Not unlike Canada, which while taxing our citizens for using coal and nuclear, coal and natural gas, we are building renewables to make everyone's lives a lot better. But Germans, not only are they taxing people for using natural gas and coal, they're also only making available that is natural gas and coal. So as a result, German industries and civilians pay around 31 cents per kilowatt hour, while the nuclear dependent French citizens pay around 19.45 cents a year, cents euro per kilowatt hour. It is thus reasonable to assume that the German greenification plan is useless. So we've reached the final part of this arduously torturous presentation. It is, what is the green goo? People have been describing uranium as the green goo, and people, and obviously in all the cartoons from Futurama to The Simpsons, we see uranium as this glowing green goo that will cause tumors and death in everywhere it spreads. That is generally the case if you allow your nuclear reactor to go into meltdown. Usually that doesn't happen, unless you're the Russians. So here's some residual concerns about nuclear energy. Nuclear waste disposal. 97% of waste produced by reactors is lower intermediate level waste. This waste is usually sealed up in bags and put in shallow pits underground. At this kind of burial, all of the radiation emitting from this low energy waste will not make it anywhere to civilization. I do remember in Chernobyl, HBO, they did say that if you stood on top of one of these piles, you would not have cancer. I will not trust that TV show, but that is an interesting point. For the 3% of high-level waste, which is the green goo that people are concerned about, we have technology to recycle them back into the reactors now. For non-recyclable waste, it is usually kept underground in deep repositories in concrete and lead-lined barrels. Unlike coal and natural gas, we just dump them into the environment and just not care about it. Nuclear weapons, stopping nuclear energy isn't going to stop nuclear weapons. Just look at America and their closest ally. We have nuclear meltdowns, which was the reason why Germany abandoned its nuclear program. Chernobyl tragedy only occurred as a result of a horribly designed RBMK reactor. Nuclear reactors in the 21st century generally do not explode. And even when they do, they have a lot of fail-safes to prevent massive meltdowns like Chernobyl. And there's significantly a lot more fail-safes to prevent that kind of supercritical reaction that happened in Chernobyl. I'll leave time for questions at the end. And obviously, uranium mining. Uranium mining is a big question. I did bring up uranium leaching is quite damaging to the ecosystems. However, the alternative to uranium mining for this kind of energy is orders of magnitude more of lead and cadmium and steel and all that stuff that causes massive damage to the environment. 1 megawatt of solar panels equates to around 150 metric tons of steel per megawatt of solar panels. Scaling up to the power of the 2 gigawatt Pickering reactor would mean around 300 kilotons of steel to just match that. To replace Pickering with solar panels, you would need to mine 4.5 times the amount of uranium mined globally annually, which is a lot of mining, a lot of destroyed environments, and a lot of dead animals. The production cost of a 2 gigawatt solar farm would also cost around 2 billion USD in manufacturing costs. Pickering in modern day USD cost around 2.8 billion USD when it was built in the 1970s. Considering the lifespan of a solar panel is also 25 years, Pickering has already made up the opportunity cost since it's been operational since 1971. Yes, while Pickering has been chugging along with its old but very reliable reactor cores, solar panels would have to be replaced every 25 years. It is a $2 billion investment every 25 years when you could have just invested 2.8 billion USD and has been operational for another 54 years. Doug Ford has go back just a second. Doug Ford has announced that the Pickering reactor would be refurbished, and that gives us another lifetime of 30 years. These are all the residual concerns about nuclear that has been brought up by green parties around the world. They are mainly myths or misplaced concerns. So decision of energy policy. So this is a map of Europe where we usually have a benchmark for renewable energy because we do not trust the American government to do anything these days. The current energy idea in most governments is that solar and wind will be best, uh, as it is the easy to set up and non-polluting source of energy while in operation. That is true. Solar and wind pollute the least when it is in operation. Usually, green parties, obviously they have an agenda, they do not bring up how much it costs to make these solar panels and wind farms and replace them. In no case study have we seen previously will the LFSCOE of solar or wind drop below coal, natural gas, or nuclear. And in no case ever, even with the U.S., even with if we just throw the entire U.S. Treasury at it, in no way could an LFSCOE 100 of solar or wind or a combination of both ever be viable. It is just way too expensive. Countries that abandon nuclear and uses a fossil fuel bridge to achieve LFSCOE 95 and 100 on solar and wind will forever be trapped in using fossil fuels. You can see that happened with Germany and Estonia. Hydro, obviously, you can tell it's very popular amongst many nations. It is a very viable, it is a very good source of energy, non-polluting, easy to set up, and unlike uranium, it is not radioactive usually. But unfortunately, if you live in places like Slovakia or otherwise Mongolia, you do not have access to these kinds of large waterways to allow you to have this kind of energy viability. And as such, I've kind of just moved hydro out of the equation of this analysis for now, because hydro is a very situational source of energy. It's not something you can just build out of nowhere. You usually do not build hydroelectric dams in the middle of Mongolia. Obviously, you will see that Lithuania and Spain have wind as their largest energy source. This graph is somewhat misleading, as both Denmark and Spain have nuclear reactors, and all of them are, and all of their well, in Spain's example, wind constitutes about 23% of Spain's energy grid, while nuclear consists of 22%. So obviously, you could do wind and solar. You will have to supplement it with nuclear, or else your economy will collapse, or you'll have to use fuel nuclear. Like Lithuania, because they have transitioned to a basically only wind. I think 60% of their domestic energy is produced by wind. Unfortunately, for those who thought wind had a chance, no. Lithuania imports 85% of its energy from Poland and Russia, well, used to, and all of it is basically just natural gas. So Lithuania, realistically on this graph, should be its majority energy is just natural gas from Russia as well, which is even worse. So here's some concluding remarks for this presentation. Coal and natural gas, especially the latter, has the lowest cost of full system, which is why a lot of developing nations use it. I do not blame them for using it. It is a very good tool for nations and civilizations to uplift themselves out of poverty. But obviously, both are rapidly depleting resources and they massively pollute the environment. Solar and wind do work on very small operations. Most traffic cameras are run on solar panels, not on nuclear reactors. But because of its full system cost of operation, will need to be supplemented by other energy sources. So it is basically impossible to actually achieve LFS 9500 out of very specific situations. These specific situations usually involve either your country has an isolated energy grid and has a population of like 1,000 people, or you live in the universe of I Am Legend. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Nuclear is a great backup for solar and wind. If you do like solar and wind, and if you have qualms about nuclear reactors, I get you. Chernobyl is scary, Fukushima is scary, 3 Mile Island is also scary. But it is not feasible to have solar and wind without nuclear as a backup, because you will never have a solar and wind fully independent system. Like Spain. Spain has an LFS 23 wind system backed by an LFS 22 nuclear system. That is how they operate without having massive costs for its customers or destroying the environment. If an economy decides to end nuclear energy while attempting to reach a high LFS solar and wind system, it will inevitably, in the case of Germany, Lithuania, and other countries, lead to environmental backsliding to fossil fuels to make up for the shortfall, because it is expensive. And possibly even may lead to this new ideology, this new philosophical idea that natural gas is somehow green. It isn't. So in conclusion, solar and wind, viable energy sources for countries who want it, but you need to supplement it with nuclear or hydro, or both, depending on your situation, or also cause a dependence on fossil fuels otherwise, due to exorbitant full-scale energy costs from 95 and 100 per megawatt hour. Questions? The only guy with a question. The only guy with a question is left. Okay, question. Yes. Because in North America we do have a lot of sparse population centers like Sarnia, say Sault Ste. Marie, or Hamilton even, and they do need a lot of energy. Um, we have the Ontario government and other governments around the world, including Poland and Czechia, have begun development of SMRs, small modular reactors, where they build parts of the reactors in different places on this kind of conveyor belt thing. Not really, it takes like 30 something years, but it will cut down construction time by a lot. And also because it is a bit smaller to serve smaller populations, it will also cost a lot less to set up. Darlington is massive. Darlington and Pickering are massive because they serve the entire population hub of the GTA plus most of Mississauga. So it is quite a large reactor. If you have SMRs for smaller population centers, they'll make it a lot cheaper. Any other questions? Yes. Because it's really expensive, dude. I, I think okay, not the not I don't like quoting TV shows because they're not a good source of information, but um, it costs around $10,000 to ship an orange to a space station. Yes, yes, you guys all watch Space Force. Yes, it is very expensive to send things to space. Maybe in the long future we are going to have things sent into space. However, as all astro enjoyers will know, if you send a lot of things into space and you don't manage them properly, they will come back down. Personally, I am not too fond of several ton barrels of high power nuclear waste landing on my doorstep, but no, if we are going to make sure that the astronauts inside the rocket don't die of radiation sickness 2 minutes in, we will have to shield the the barrels or whatever container we use in lead and concrete, and then when they come back down, it will be a lot harder to burn up. It will become this kind of nuclear depleted dirty bomb missile that is approaching us from the exosphere, and we might as well just bring back the Death Star at that point. RBMK. RBMK reactors are a Soviet thing too. It's RBMK is the base. Okay, nuclear reactors right now are really expensive. Darlington, I think Justin would know, cost around $14 billion to build, USD to build, just for the first 4 cores alone. Because we want as much quality as possible, so we don't blow up the entirety of Oshawa. Obviously, the Soviet Union, having minimal care for its civilians or any of the environment, decided let's go for cheap. So instead of using zirconium rods, they decided to use graphite rods instead. Graphite has an issue where if you cap the graphite in something, I forgot what it was, when you actually insert the control rods into the reaction chamber, it actually increases the reactivity of the chamber. Obviously, that is not good if your reactor is already kind of going to overdrive, and as a result, that need for cost cutting on the control rods is what led to the Chernobyl nuclear reactor. Uh, in terms of a lot of things like maybe phones, maybe watches, quantity over quality is generally acceptable. When you're dealing with something that could blow up an entire city, you generally go with quality, and that's why things are usually very expensive. Question. Oh God. I'd consider I'd consider one of the fail safes as in like hiring proper staff, and they obviously didn't have that fail safe. So one of the first fail safes is hire proper staff for nuclear reactors. If your nuclear reactor staff don't know what they're doing, none of your fail safes will work because they'll just stick their hand into the reactor chamber. Don't do that. Question. Okay, we are entering the region of we are entering a region called neo-colonialism. Um, No, it shouldn't be particularly difficult, though if you the main issue with training individuals to use nuclear reactors is if the individuals do not know how the nuclear reactor works themselves. if we in developing countries where hopefully soon we will build nuclear reactors for Lagos, Abuja, and other population centers in the developing world, we should also tell them how a nuclear reactor works. That will probably come with the package of building a nuclear reactor. They usually know how a nuclear reactor works, and as a result, the staff will know what not to do. Um, there's testimonies that most of the staff at the Chernobyl reactor were not fully trained, were not informed of what fail-safes did what, and as a result, that caused the meltdown. Because fail-safes only work if the human operating it is not an idiot. Modern fail-safes even work when humans operating it aren't idiots, so that's quite nice. Which is why we usually don't have reactor meltdowns due to human error. Yes. Alfred. Yes, that is obviously the case, but as I've said, it all just comes with proper education of nuclear, of like of because I would not say that it is particularly difficult for anyone in this room, given them 2 to 3 years in proper education, to know how to build properly a component of the nuclear. It would it's a bit like ants. It's a bit like ants trying to circumvent or trying to move something. It doesn't matter if the ant doesn't need to know how this entire thing works or what not only the own ant but the entire hive needs to do. The ant just needs to know what it needs to do, and that's about it. So when you're building a nuclear reactor and using a nuclear reactor, as long as the people there know what they're hired to do, you will have a great success.